Everyone, thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you for joining the first virtual Jewish Center Business Networking event. My name is Ilana Kamenetsky, and I am the chair of the Business Networking Committee, and I'm hosting this event with my co-chair, Grant Silverstein. Grant, say hi. So before we get started, just some housekeeping. Everyone's lines are muted except panelists. The chat will be active. If there's any thoughts or feedback or questions, most importantly, that you have throughout this event, there will be a Q&A after. We will be looking toward the chat to inform that Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. If you notice, Zoom has now have a closed captioning feature. If anyone is in need of closed captioning, just click on the CC at the bottom. There will also be information, this will be recorded. It will live on the Jewish Center website. That URL will be in the chat, as well as an email to get in touch with us if you have any questions or feedback or thoughts. If anyone has any thoughts on future events that they'd like to hear from the Business Networking Committee, we will definitely be having future events, and please share those thoughts as well, anything that you would like to hear about from the Business Networking Committee. Now to begin. So the Jewish Center reestablished our Business Networking Committee in response to the economic ramifications of COVID. The committee really aims to help people make meaningful professional connections to help people get to their next career opportunity within the JC membership and beyond to our larger community. You know, the more people we spoke to in our work, both Grant and I, speaking with people who have reached out to the committee, there were certain topics that kept popping up that seemed rather unique to searching for a job during COVID. Certain things like, how do you network when you can't network in person? How do you prepare for a virtual interview? How do you make the most of a virtual interview? How do you look for jobs that might be the most relevant to you, will convert to interviews when there seem to be less jobs available and so many more people applying for each specific job? So I'm sure you'd rather hear these answers from our panelists. So I would like each panelist to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about your area of expertise. So I will start with Sadaf. Sadaf, please introduce yourself.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Sadaf Sattarzadeh. I am an associate at 52X Consulting. We are a New York City-based agency, very boutique. We specialize specifically within the real estate, design, architecture, and construction space. And as much as we do traditional search, we do a lot of strategic hiring and consulting with the firms that we represent. So we get heavily involved in their businesses from a day-to-day, and is also from a kind of long-term strategic planning. So get to see things from all sides. It's very nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful, thank you. Amy?
Hi, I'm Amy Sugin. I'm a managing director at Koya Partners. We are an executive search firm. We specialize in mission-driven organizations, which means largely nonprofit and higher education. We have a big social justice practice, essentially any organization that is driven by mission. My personal practice is largely in higher education search, mostly on the executive level, so on the provost, dean level, or on the administrative side, human resources, finance, things like that. Some nonprofit also creeping in there, so I'm happy to share whatever I know about my own industry with you and to hear what my fellow panelists have to say about their industries. Thanks for having me, Ilana.
Wonderful, thank you. Jason?
Good evening, everyone. Hello from Denver. My name is Jason Hill. I own a company called Sound Advice. We actually started it in Midtown coming up on 14 years ago. Sound Advice started as a recruiting, consulting, and staffing organization. Today, my primary focus is on our new initiative, which is called Sound Advice Careers. It's a separate website, soundavicecareers.com, where we help job seekers from across the country. We've had a couple thousand people go through the program in the last 2 years. It's been great, and it's really geared towards helping people find work that they love and enjoy and play the game of finding work. And that includes what we call tangible deliverables, such as helping people with resumes and LinkedIn. But it's also the strategy. We're finding that, especially in the pandemic right now, strategy is equally, if not more important, how to play the game. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jason. And last but not least, Michelle.
Hello, good evening. My name is Michelle Cyrus, and I lead recruitment at Artsy. That's how I know Alana. And I've been there for about 4 years. Artsy is currently the world's largest art marketplace, largest online marketplace for collecting and discovering art. And I oversee the entire business hiring, everything from product design, data engineering, finance, operations, sales, and I lead the team there. Prior to that was at a smaller fintech startup. And then prior to that, I started my career earlier on the agency side, really focusing on startup businesses and helping them scale in New York. And that's a bit about me.
Wonderful. Thank you. I do want to point out one more housekeeping thing. It's best to view the panel in speaker view as opposed to gallery view. So just a note for the best viewing experience. Now that we heard and we're introduced to our panelists, I wanted to tell everyone a little bit about the people who are in the audience. So we had about 90 people sign up to this event. And what I thought was interesting is how diverse the careers were. And it really underscored for me how pervasive the effects of this pandemic are. We have lawyers, people in tech, finance, nutrition, engineers, architects, a caterer, a physicist. It's really so far reaching, an artist as well. And also I thought it was interesting to see that it was also affecting people at all stages of their careers. We have people logged on that are looking for their first or second job, people in the middle of their career, the lifespan of their careers, as well as people who've worked over 20 years. So the reason I mention that is I think sometimes there's a comfort to know you're not alone. So many people have been affected. And even though that doesn't necessarily help in your personal search, knowing that this is something that is happening across industries and across career stages, I think just really underscores the effects of this pandemic economically and professionally for people. So I guess with knowing that, I want to jump right into the questions that are hopefully going to help people in their search. So gentlemen first, I'm going to start with Jason. So Jason, how do you network when you can't network in person? Jason, you have to unmute, I'm sorry.
Great question. It's interesting. We were extraordinarily busy before the pandemic, and now our lives are busy in a different kind of way. But it's actually a pretty amazing opportunity if you can move the pieces on the chessboard correctly. So we want to build relationships afar, and the best way to do that is obviously digitally. And when the digital approach, it's different than the in-person approach. We had talked about the networking in person, handing out business cards. Well, here we're going to do it a little bit differently. You're going to start the dialogue before you even have a conversation. And the ways that you do that is through social media. There are multiple locations when it comes to identifying new contacts. You can find them on LinkedIn groups, threads that they participate in, Facebook, blog posts, so on and so forth. Do your research on who the organization is, who works at the organization. Now, someone might say, well, Jason, that's a great strategy for a small company or startup, but what about large companies? It still works in those environments too. You want to determine the best way to engage those people where they're at. And some people might say that's a little stalking. In this capacity, it's not stalking. It's what we call doing the sniper method. The sniper method is really being precise on who the target company is, who works at that company, who works at that department, who the team members are, who do you know over at that organization that you can reach out to either directly or indirectly. What we're finding is a lot of times you might not know somebody directly, but you might know somebody indirectly. And having that person become an advocate or a champion is going to be extraordinarily valuable in starting that dialogue. And when you're reaching out to that person, you're not going to do it and say, hey, I just lost a job. I'd like to reach out to you and see if you could help me, you're going to actually reach out and say something to the effect of, I noticed that you were working over at company XYZ and you're doing some pretty interesting stuff over there. I follow that, or I'm in the space. I wanted to reach out and introduce myself. Or you might want to share an article or a thought piece with them. Start off with something that is going to initiate conversation.
Wonderful. I like that term, sniper method, just really zeroing in and trying to find the most effective way and precise way to approach things. Michelle, Amy, or Sadaf, anyone have anything to add on this, the networking?
I would say for sure Jason's comment on approach is so critical, you know, and not just going in for, even though sniper method, not going in for the kill on that first round, right? And really just being a human to human and trying to connect with someone. You know, I think everything else is understandable and implied, and you'll get to the point of conversation about your resume and job, but show interest, do your research. I think that's really an important way to connect.
Great.
I'll just add, oh, sorry, Michelle.
Go ahead, please.
I would add really taking some time to do an audit of who you know and who you should have on your list. And so think about, you know, your educational background, other places that you worked, people who you worked for, people who worked for you. Really think about your network and write them down, keep them on a list, and try to figure out ways to connect with each one of them, because I think it is much easier to network with people that you know or who have met than to go to perfect strangers. And I think it's a good place to start.
And Michelle, I think you wanted to add something?
Sure, yeah. I would also add that there's actually a lot of great online communities, and maybe it's been something that hasn't had to be on your radar before, but there's a lot of fantastic communities that you can join. One of them is through Meetup. So Meetups historically sometimes would be in person, but they're also primarily online communities that you can be a part of. So if you're a data scientist, there's probably dozens of meetup groups for focusing on, you know, data science and whatever sort of specialty area you're in. So it's called Meetup if you haven't heard of it, MEETUP. It's a great community to join, and it's a great way to network online without even having to have a specific job that you're going for, just like-minded individuals in the same professional space. Similarly, LinkedIn has, I think, Jason, you mentioned that LinkedIn has a lot of online communities. And then there's also Slack, which is normally used for companies
for $27 billion.
That's a good point. I don't know the cost on an individual basis.
No, I'm saying Salesforce just purchased Slack for $20 billion.
But they have communities that you can join as well, and there are specific ones that exist already, but there are also ways where you can sort of like jumpstart that and reach out to folks in a similar space and start one on your own. I'm a part of a recruitment Slack network, and it's also just a really great place for knowledge sharing, and that all comes into play with networking. So I would call those out too.
That's wonderful. You know, it's interesting, all these terms that you wouldn't usually associate with a job search, like sniper method and audit, as Amy mentioned, really now are appropriate now that you can't do this by just handing someone a business card at an event. That was really great. Thank you, Paul.
Alana, one thing I'd like to add, you know, that sniper method is going to also carry through whether you're virtual or in person, right? You want to be calculated in your search. Too oftentimes we see people, they're reacting to a situation, and you want to be as proactive as you can. Obviously, if something changes on a dime, an organization has a layoff, or you get fired, or the situation churns dramatically, but that's why you want to be properly prepared for that, and you can move forward. And you constantly want to be touching your relationships, reaching out to people. And one of the things I always advise my clients is, you know, reach out to X number of people on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to keep in contact with them. In doing so, you're not going to have a cold start when you need it. You want those warm relationships, and having those warm relationships in place is going to allow things to slide and move that much faster when you need it.
Great. I like that term as well, warm relationships. Now we're going to move to our next question, which is to Sadaf. How do you find and focus on the right opportunities, those most likely to convert to interviews? What we're seeing is so many different approaches. Should you canvas wide? Should you go narrow? And this dovetails nicely off the first question, but really, how do you focus on the right opportunities? Sadaf?
Yeah, I think personally, my thought belief in this will go, I think, to later in conversation about search fatigue. To really reduce search fatigue, you want to start narrow, low-hanging fruit, and within your expertise. A time like this is definitely, I would say, not the best time to reinvent the wheel, right? So focus in your market sector, in people that you know, and what you have been doing. There are traditional and somewhat obvious ways for search. So LinkedIn is a huge tool that we have to use. It's a great function. They have a great job search function where you can search based on title, skill, experience level, even date posted, right? So you want to be looking at jobs that are relatively recent posting, especially since this time in COVID, 3 months ago is like equivalent to a year ago, right? So something that was posted then, it's still up. Don't waste your time with. Under their job search feature, and technology is huge right now. We need to utilize technology. Make sure they have a feature called Job Alert. So make sure you're turning on that Job Alert feature. And LinkedIn will do the work for you and alert you when a position comes up that is relative to job searches that you have done in the past. You want timing, right? Timing is critical right now. We are in a pool of a lot of really talented applicants out there. So you want to be able to kind of, be at the top. How do you get to the top of application? Time it so that you're one of the first to apply. LinkedIn also has a job recommendations function, which I recommend going through regularly. There really are some good things there that maybe are a little outside of your box, but you wouldn't have thought of or you wouldn't have searched on your own. Something to note about the recommendations feature, it shows jobs based on your previous job searches, your job alerts, your profile, and your activity on LinkedIn. So you really want to make sure that your LinkedIn profile is up to date, which I can go on forever, and I'm sure we all could on what that means. But also that your profile is accurate. And we make really simple mistakes there, but location, title, skill sets, right? Make sure all of those features are up to date, so you're getting these notifications accurately, regularly. The other thing to kind of expand on what Jason said, be your own recruiter. Develop a list of firms, do your research, find places that you would consider working and research them. Look at their websites. A lot of times companies will post jobs to their websites before they go to features like LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn's not a cheap job posting site, right? So look at the website, look at job boards. Sometimes I find that I don't utilize job boards when I'm trying to do my own business development, but there's some really great ones out there. Simply Hired, and then you have your regulars like Indeed and Monster. It's litigious, but make sure you take the time and do the searches. There are even some niche sector job boards, which I'm not very familiar with, but one that I am is something like USA Jobs, where you can find jobs within federal agencies, right? So figure out what the specialized boards are, for your profession and search within them. I think, for getting the interview right and really making sure that you're standing out, look for the mutual contacts, right? Everyone's mentioned this already, but referral is the best way in, best way to kind of go straight to the hiring manager. Again, you don't know who's getting your resume, who's sorting through everything. So how do you get to the hiring manager directly? Referrals are great. And then again, figure out who the hiring manager is and go through LinkedIn. Their LinkedIn Premium, there is a membership that I think you can do for still a free month. Send a personal email to the hiring manager directly, right? A sincere note, just bringing yourself to their attention. So
really interesting. I'm hearing a lot from all of you about how important utilizing technology really is.
Absolutely.
And I think that another interesting point you made is this idea of timing and reimagining timelines, right? Like in a COVID world, things are so compressed. Does anyone have anything to add on this, on how to focus on the right opportunities, or we can go to the next question?
Just one thing that always comes to mind, one of the things that we talk about, and it's a cornerstone of a course that I developed, we call it the personal equation. And knowing what your personal equation is critically important. And what I always tell folks when I'm potentially going to be working with them, you don't want to go into the supermarket hungry, right? You don't want to start looking at opportunities and say, oh, that looks good, that looks good. You start to go down a path, you might even get a job, but after the honeymoon wears off, you might say, this isn't the right opportunity for you. So it starts with your personal equation. And once you know what your personal equation is, and what I mean by personal equation, think of it as a multivariable equation. Variables can include, but are not limited to, compensation, title, geographic location, role, responsibility, mission of organization, commute, benefits, perks, culture of organization, upward mobility. The variables are endless. You need to know what variables are important to you. Once you have that, then you're going to be able to be laser focused on what you want.
Wonderful. I'm going to, just in the interest of time, go to the next question because there's so many topics we'd love to cover. Amy, how do you stand out from the pack? So now that we're already decided this is the job, we zeroed in, we used our sniper method, we did our audit, and now I want to apply for this job. We see there's like overnight 600 applicants, 1,000 applicants for one job. How do I stand out? What is it? Is it my resume? Is it my cover letter? Should I be employing gimmicks? If you can just speak to that a little bit and standing out.
Yeah, sure. So I personally am very skeptical of gimmicks. I'm interested in other industries, and it may be that more creative industries than mine welcome gimmicks. But for me, they stand in the way of what I need to know about you. And if I'm going to get a lot of resumes and I need to go through them quickly, I want you to make my job easier by telling me what I need to know about you. So I guess my first piece of advice is know your industry and know whether, what's sort of welcome and common and traditional in your industry. For me, resumes and what I call a letter of interest are very common. And so, I think one thing to do is to really think about whether or not you are qualified for this job. And that requires you to do some research on it, on the company, on the organization, on what they're looking for, and really be honest with yourself about how much of that job is really squarely in your wheelhouse and how much of it is going to be a new challenge. And I think that figuring out that balance is something that you have to do. I don't think that you need to have done everything on the job, right? Because then it's not going to be an interesting job for you. You want to have a job that's going to be a challenge for you, but you want to have the right amount of challenge, and you want to also be able to articulate for yourself what it is about this role that you've done before, that you've accomplished before, that you could bring to it. So so know your industry, be honest with yourself, and then take time with the materials that you're going to submit. So a resume to me is really interesting. I like it to be easily readable. So that means font that is a reasonable size. I don't like a lot of, fancy things on a resume because I need to see the information on it. I always give the advice that the information on the resume should be less about job tasks and more about accomplishments. So it would be the difference between, so maybe I'm hiring somebody who's doing admissions at a university. So a job task would be responsible for enrollment of freshman class, and an accomplishment would be, increase the applications to, the entering class by 25% over the course of 2 years. That's sort of the difference.
And that's eye-catching right away. You're leading with an accomplishment.
Right.
I'm a sales professional, and I always lead with that. Dollar amount, how much I've sold year over year will always catch someone's eye. I think one of the things that you mentioned that I think is so important is knowing your industry. I was recently speaking with someone, and they mentioned that they were interviewing someone for a job and they wore a suit, and the company is an athleisure clothing brand, kind of relaxed casual clothing, and they thought it was so crazy that this person wore a suit. Now, personally, I thought that was a little dramatic. Obviously, this person wanted to make a very professional impression, but really understanding who you're speaking to, and knowing your industry and knowing about the job is certainly something that I've heard quite a bit about. Does anyone have anything to add on this? Resumes, cover letters, gimmicks, how do you stand out?
I'd add on the cover letter piece, because cover letters often get a bad rap, and it's because they're not always utilized correctly by people that are receiving them, but they're often required. And you can stand out through a cover letter, at least from my personal experience. And I think when the structure has to be correct, and you want to be clearly articulating impact that you've made and success that you had, and do that succinctly. But what I find really will stand out is when you can connect to a company's vision or a mission, and kind of do a little bit of research on what the company stands for and how you relate to that. Normally people who are hiring are thinking, oh, I want somebody to come on who has, alignment with our values. And often that is something that's very important. And that's a piece that I've noticed really helps folks stand out.
Wonderful. And I think that also connects perfectly to knowing your industry, and then you connect with that vision and mission, because the two together will really help you stand out. Jason?
And just a quick point. One of the things that we found, there's a thing called the applicant tracking system that no one's talked about yet. It's critically important. These days when we're writing resumes, we're actually writing them for 3 audiences simultaneously. The first audience is the hiring manager. That's obviously the person you're going to be working with and for. The second audience is the recruiter or the HR professional. In certain cases, they can be the gatekeeper or they can be the advocate for you. You need to make sure that you know how to interact with them. They're the lens that's going to be looking at it and determining whether the resume is going to be going to the hiring manager. And that third is the applicant tracking system. And to Amy's point before, your resume needs to be performance tuned and optimized for the specific job opportunity that you're applying to, otherwise known as, if you're in the marketing world, think of it as SEO. It needs to be performance tuned, otherwise it doesn't score well against the algorithmic index. One of the things I saw in the chat here said, what do you do when there's 800 applicants in the candidate pool? If there are 800 applicants in the candidate pool, that's like 1 million results on Google. We don't look at all 1 million results. We look at the top half dozen and we make a decision. Recruiters are the same way. If you have 200 to 300 applicants in the candidate pool, they're only going to look at the top dozen, maybe 2 dozen. From there, they're going to shortlist 3 to 6, and out of that 3 to 6, they typically hire 1. So you need to make sure your resume is performance tuned.
Great. This was really great. Michelle, you get the next question, and I think this is a really important one. Virtual interviews. How should you prepare for them differently than an interview in person? How can you excel at them? Any tips that you might have for the virtual versus in-person interview?
Absolutely. I will say that there are definitely differences. I think the differences are a bit more tactical. And so I have a list of things to prepare and kind of make sure you're set up for success there. But I would even start by just saying that, the same rules of interviewing apply. And that's the biggest sort of reminder, and not to get overwhelmed or think that it's sort of different, a completely different landscape. You're still wanting to make sure that you engage, that you prepare, that you're focused on really listening to the questions and making sure that you're responding appropriately and highlighting things from your career and accomplishments, both similarly as you've done in your resume and your cover letter, now actually sort of bringing it to life. So I would start by, on the engagement piece, really speaking to the fact that engagement is always something that's important for interviewing, but because you're doing it through a screen, it's even more important that you're present and that translates through your screen, because you can't rely on that in-person, sort of those social cues in person. And in order to stay engaged, I would say prepare as you would for any interview. Really make sure you're not relying on the fact that you can have your resume up next to you, that you can have notes up next to you. Make sure that you're able to set yourself up so that you can be fully present during the interviews, so that you can really hear what someone's saying to you. You could respond with questions accordingly. There's a sort of back and forth dialogue, and that you can speak to your experience and accomplishments without having to have it feel rehearsed or to kind of look at notes. So the preparation stays the same. I would, really still lean into that, if not even more so that you really don't have to have any distractions around you. And yeah, make sure that you're clear, you're concise, and that you're focusing on the connection of that during the interview. Those are the same rules that I would say apply, but just kind of like double down on it. And then the other side of it is the more sort of tactical pieces where I've learned, well, you know, not the hard way, but by trial and error. So all these things that I'm going to tell you right now have been mistakes that I've made and I've seen, and it's fine. But just little pieces of things.
Advice.
Exactly. And there are a lot of them are just sort of tech related. So the thing that I would suggest first and foremost is just to set your tech up ahead of time. So make sure that you have a strong internet connection, which inevitably there's going to be something happening at some point with your internet. So test that out ahead of time, have a backup. There's something called a hotspot, which you can get, and sometimes even on your phone, you can toggle it on. And that's just if your internet's out, you can connect through that. So make sure your internet is strong. Test your video and your audio. If you're using headphones, make sure that they're connected to your desktop and that that's working. So just turn on, if it's a video conference through Zoom or Google Hangouts, do a test run, join it a little bit early, and make sure that you're connected. Make sure simply that your devices are charged ahead of time so that you're not starting to panic if you see that your battery's going low during an interview. And then the other piece that I would say, a reminder, is don't get flustered if tech glitches occur, because they do. And they happen on both sides, and you'll figure it out, and everyone's sort of understanding in this environment. So if that happens in the middle, leading up to, don't get panicked, and don't let that sort of set the tone for your interview. It's okay, and it happens, and you can expect it.
And how you deal with it probably reflects well on you, right? If you don't get too carried away or get too nervous or anxious about it and handle it with a certain grace, I'm sure that would reflect well in the interview. Does anyone else have anything to add on virtual interviews?
Just going to share, I heard this terrible story the other day from a friend of mine who told me that she had an interview and she thought it was on the phone. So she came down in her pajamas, her messy kitchen behind her, to learn only that it was a video interview. And she had to run upstairs and get dressed and come back downstairs, and she was late. And so my advice to you is get all the way dressed. In case you have to stand up by accident, you spill something on yourself, you have to get up, you want to make sure you're all dressed. Wear shoes, really dress as you would for an in-person interview. I think it comes through, and it avoids.
Sadaf or Jason, anything on virtual interviews before we move on?
My last quick comment would be, as much as we're seeing each other face to face, it's really hard virtually to pick up on social cues and body language, things like that. And that's okay. Just be aware of that, right? Especially when you're being interviewed, you're looking for that from the other person to read them. You're probably not going to get the same read. So just try not to look too in-depthly into it. And if, there is a snafu in technology, exactly what Michelle had said, and really just try and calm yourself and keep going. It's the most important thing in this digital world.
Yes.
Yeah. The only other thing I would, or two things that I think are important to add. Everyone that had made comments, I completely agree. I think that they're very well put. The two things that, number one, have fun, right? This is where you're going to be spending the majority of your time, whether it be in a virtual capacity or a physical capacity, hopefully sooner than later. Have fun, show them who you are and why you belong in that organization, why you belong as a member of that team. The more you are yourself, the more they're going to see who you are and see if there's going to be a fit. That three-letter word is critically important. And the second thing is you want to make what we call a meaningful connection, right? You don't want it to be transactional. You don't want to be stiff in the interview. You want to make a meaningful connection, because that person is ultimately going to become your advocate, your champion, whether or not you're going to be they're going to be your hiring manager or they're going to be involved in the decision-making process, especially when it comes to people that are influencers along the way, external recruiters, internal recruiters. So you want to get them to become your advocate and championing and make that meaningful connection. And the way that you do that is you find some commonality that was mentioned before. Find those bonds and try and expand upon them.
Great. So now moving on to our next question, and I think this is something that's coming up a lot. People will say, even when you've done your networking and you've really tried to get interviews and there really isn't a job available, but someone puts you in touch with someone and they're willing to give you an informational interview. I'm hearing a lot of people are going on informational interviews and they really, don't know how to make the most of an informational interview. Like, what should I be asking? How do I prepare when there isn't a specific job description? And then what's the best way to follow up on that informational interview? Because it's a longer game than just a thank you note for an actual job. So Jason, if you could begin with this one and then we'll open it up.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Awesome. So, you know, we've a theme of tonight's conversation is networking, right? Whether it be physical or hopefully in person sooner than later. By networking, you're intentionally looking for opportunity. I like the comment that who was it, Amy made before about her, unfortunately, her friend had that snafu, that situation whereby she was in her pajamas and in her, you need to get dressed. You need to, am I wearing a tutu down below? Potentially, but I'm wearing a jacket.
Well, now we're going to ask you to stand up.
Maybe at the end. But, you want to play the part. Number one, it presents who you want to be and who you are. And number two, it gives you that confidence when you go into that. And when you're talking to people in this virtual capacity, even when you're having these Zooms, you want to do it in a way that there are no distractions because people will make a perception of you. And getting people to become your advocate and champion is going to be critically important. We call it going through the side door versus going through the front door. And going through the side door, you're going to identify opportunities that don't even exist yet, right? You're going to show people the potential that you can bring to the organization. You're going to apply what we call the Kennedy principle. The Kennedy principle is really focusing on ask not what the employer can do for you, but what you can do for the employer. And if there are no opportunities that they have for you at that moment, it's how can you help them? Do they have any special projects where you can provide either contract services or potentially give them an hour or 2 hours of your subject matter expertise? And then they're going to remember you, could be a day from now, could be a month from now, could be a year from now, and say, who is that gal from Artsy? She was amazing. She reached out to me and she said, I'm going to think of her. Turn it from the 800 candidate pool to a blue ocean strategy. The blue ocean strategy just means fish where everybody else isn't fishing.
Great.
Open it up.
Sadaf, Amy, Michelle, anyone on what to do about informational interviews and how to really capitalize on them? No? Great. So we're going to go on to the next question. This one is to Sadaf. You had mentioned it before, but how in this climate with job searches lasting longer than they usually do, how do you avoid that search fatigue and keep yourself fresh and vital? And this can actually dovetail on a question that I actually prepared for Michelle, but we'll combine them in the interest of time, avoiding search fatigue and keeping your skills sharp and staying relevant. So Sadaf, if you could begin with that and then we'll open it up. I know, Michelle, half of that was your question.
First and foremost, I would say set a schedule. Treat this almost as a job, and do it within the working hours. Anyone who is receiving your resume, right, it's during their working hours. So just stick to some sort of schedule. Give yourself a break, and you don't have to apply to every single thing at the exact moment it comes out. I know I said timing before is important, but just be kind to yourself, be kind to others in this process, and the people on the receiving end, right? There's just a lot happening for everyone right now. The thing that I'm sure people somewhat loathe, but utilize recruiters, find recruiters that specialize in your industry, get referrals, connect with good ones. You know, I know the recruiting industry is a lot of people in it, and there's the reputation of our industry is not always the best, but there are some really solid recruiters out there. And Jason uses this word, which I love, advocate. You know, find people who will be your advocates, whether they're recruiters or, you know, people internally. Focus on things that make sense, you know, for who you are and what you're looking for, so that you are not spinning your wheels and getting rejected on things that wouldn't have made sense to begin with. And I think the last one that I tell people often is, if you get rejected in the process, and with everything, again, you know, the talent pool out there, it's bound to happen, pick up and move on. Preserve your mental and emotional energy for the next task at hand.
Great. Anyone have anything to say on search fatigue as well as keeping your skills sharp and relevant? Michelle?
Should I dovetail into the sharp
Yes.
skills? Okay, great. I think a nice sort of segue, one of the points that I was going to make about keeping your skills sharp, but also just applies to kind of search fatigue. I think taking a step back and using this time to reflect on your interests and really thinking about, you know, what skills do I want to hone further? What are skills that I actually want to develop that I don't have? And is this the time for me to make a pivot in my career? You know, is this the time for me to join a company where I'm going to feel most passionate? My last role, I didn't love X, Y, and Z aspects of it. And really, you know, utilize this space to set yourself up for the next role that's going to be really fulfilling to you. And I know I've gone through that before I joined Artsy, and I've now been with Artsy for 4 years, and it's been an incredible experience, one that's very fulfilling to me. And I did have downtime between jobs because the startup I was with prior downsized, and I had that space in the middle. And I said, okay, don't panic, use this space, take advantage of it, and really think about what it is that you want to build in terms of the next step of your career. So don't forget that piece. I think it's really important. In terms of sharpening your skills, if once you decide I want to hone these, I want to develop these, there's a lot of different resources that you can do in terms of online classes. And I can post some of them to the chat, but I know Google actually recently launched like free digital skills training for job seekers and entrepreneurs that have been impacted during COVID. So I've seen things for like a UX researcher or any sort of, you know, digital marketing. There's a number of things on there, and there's actually a ton of resources. edX is one of them that features, I think, online courses led by professors. Allison is one of them that teaches, I think a lot of these are free as well. Anything from like languages, science, financial literacy, Udemy, there's Coursera, there's a ton of online resources for wanting to hone or develop certain skills. So I would say look into those. And then also, you know, find a passion project. This is kind of similar to the reflecting on your interests. Don't underestimate the skills that you have already and that you want to sort of put to use, even if you can't monetize them right away. Find that passion project, spend some time on that. You can use that during interviews as well, and you can use that to kind of keep your skills sharp. And also keep your eyes and ears open for contract, consulting, temp work. Especially now, I think a lot of companies who are also struggling are looking for more alternatives to full-time. So there's probably going to be a lot more consulting or temp opportunities or contract work open. So that's a great way to kind of keep your skill set while you're looking for something more full-time. And then the last thing I would say is, if you're so inclined, really, so, you know, create a platform to knowledge share. So often I see people writing blog posts on Medium is a great platform to do that as well. And it's just another way to network also, and kind of kill two birds with one stone there.
Great. Amy or Sadaf or Jason, anyone to add on either keeping your skills sharp or search fatigue?
Well, just to add on search fatigue, one of the things that we see is people are click, apply, right? One of the features of LinkedIn, it's a blessing, but it's also a curse, is the apply with the LinkedIn button. So people are starting to apply to tens or hundreds of positions, and they're not keeping track of what they're doing. And when we work with our clients, we teach them to create a job seeker activity log. If you folks email me, I'm happy to, it's something we provide our clients as part of our package, but I'd be happy to provide it to anyone on the call here. And we're also going to provide something else as well to people on the call. But having a job seeker activity log is going to show your daily progress. I like that idea. I forget who said it, about making sure that you have a schedule. We tell our clients, if you've been laid off, or if you're no longer in the workforce, you need to be creating a routine or a schedule that near mirrors what you had before. So you could get up in the morning, could be, instead of getting up at 6, maybe you're going to get up at 7. Go exercise. Exercise is extremely important. Even if you take a lap around your block 2-3 times to get the blood pumping, and then you can get showered, get dressed, have a shave, do what you need to do that morning routine so you don't lose it, and then get at your desk. My wife's late grandfather, may he rest in peace, used to say the best time at finding a job was when you had one. But what that also translates to is when you are looking for a job, that is a full-time job, and you need to do it in a diligent manner. So make sure that you're thoughtful, use a job seeker activity log, and dedicate a certain number of hours, time on a daily basis, but not just to applying to positions, but to building that dialogue. Who was it? Michelle said it, that it's critically important to start engaging. We tell our clients to engage in what you're passionate about in the professional sphere, and people are going to gravitate towards you and say, what are you doing? Come work for us. We see this too often where you're the subject matter expert, you're passionate about what you do. That could be accounts payable, that could be intellectual property law, that could be JS nodes with XYZ, whatever it is. Be passionate about it, find your community, you're going to find work.
Great. So before I turn it off to Grant for Q&A, I did want to say that and we're going to post the Business Networking Committee URL, we did start a freelance database, to Michelle's point. So if you are either looking for freelancers or if you are a freelancer, please go to that link and fill out your information so we can definitely pair you with an opportunity. And even if it's temporary, it keeps your skills relevant and it keeps you vital and engaged. Now I'm going to turn to Grant, who has been moderating the chat. So he will start with the Q&A. Grant?
Thank you, Alana. I think I got a few questions. Again, feel free to keep them coming. I'm gonna go the first one to Jason. We got a question that an industry that this participant's industry is extremely ageist, and how to overcome that.
Sure. So first off, ageism is real. We know that happens. Do we know what industry it is?
I think it's graphic design.
Okay. Let's assume it's graphic design. Ageism is real.
And it is.
Okay,
I just got confirmation.
Awesome. So ageism is real. We know that it happens, and it's happening more now than ever. And we talked about earlier in tonight's conversation about the importance of technology, the importance of owning the technology and embracing the technology. And we've seen a dramatic shift in people adapting technology. So we're here in Denver. Before the pandemic, I get back to New York quite a bit. But now we're working out of the home, as is most everybody these days. And we have 2 home offices and we have 2 home classrooms. And my 7-year-old has adapted to this technology. He's running Zoom meetings and all this other stuff. Embrace the technology as best you can. That's recommendation number 1. Number 2, when it comes to your physical appearance, you don't need to dye your hair some CVS dye that looks like color number 2 and makes you stand out. But at the same time, you don't want to look like you're ready for Alta Cockaville. Okay, so you want to present yourself as best you possibly can. And, again, going back to that routine, going back to taking pride in who you are and yourself. And then in terms of how you present information on your resume, when you're sending information out there, it's really going to come down to, in the graphics industry, it's going to come down to your portfolio and what you can produce. So if you can make compelling portfolio and a compelling website and possibly some videos articulating what you do and the value you can add, that ageism will be mitigated.
Okay. I'm going to make this a 3-part question and sort of combine a few questions. And I'm going to kick it off to Michelle to start. The first is, we discussed cover letters earlier, but someone asked another question just to reiterate of what the value of a cover letter is, and that they've been told that people who recruit, that they are inundated with resumes and that they're not even reading cover letters. And I will speak from personal experience. I once spoke with an HR professional who said, to you, it's the most important thing. To me, it's literally more paperwork on my desk. So if you could sort of just start talking about that, as well as I think the follow-up, the pre-interviews of after you submit your resumes, of when do you follow up to confirm that they received it, and then post-interview of follow-up from there, of how often do you check in and find out where you stand in the process, and at what point do you throw in the towel and stop checking in. So it's a lot, but I think it's all very connected.
Yeah, all great questions and all things that are going to potentially be points of frustration. Starting with the cover letter, I will say you can expect that many people won't look at cover letters. I think I've seen that too, and it just depends who's on the receiving end of it, and you can't control for that. So you can sort of set your expectation that the cover letter may be read thoroughly and it may not be, but it's often required. And so if it is required, I would say, just in order to kind of set yourself up to have the biggest chance to stand out, to make sure that you're kind of starting off with that top, going in really strong with that sort of top line of how you connect to the company's vision or mission, and then very clearly and succinctly pull out the pieces from your accomplishments that you think are most relevant for the role. But because cover letters are so iffy, I would say have a template that you use and have specific areas that you filter out depending on which role that you're working on, so that you're not spending way too much time on something that you don't know if it's actually going to be extremely impactful. So make it work for you, and understand that in some cases that might be the piece that helps you stand out, and in other cases it might not be read. But make sure that you're kind of setting yourself up to manage your time spent around that.
Right. Does anyone else have anything to add on the cover letters?
Be careful of the template, because, I have seen many a cover letter that, names one organization at the beginning and then names another organization at the end. So so I see a cover letter. Well, I think the resume is kind of the gatekeeper, and people are not going to read your letter if they're not interested in your resume. And so I do think that you want to make sure that you're tailoring who you send to. And then I think it does depend on industry and where you are. In my industry in higher education, everybody needs to have what we call a letter of interest. It's more in depth than a cover letter in my lexicon. And that it does, it both says why you think you should have this job. It's an opportunity for you to talk to the hiring manager or to the search committee. And then it also gives you an opportunity to say what it is about the organization that is meaningful to you. So, when you do it, if you're just sort of blind sending a resume in, I think you might want to be a little judicious about it, but there are times that I think it's very, very meaningful. But just don't let it shoot you in the foot by, making a mistake like that. Obvious that it's a form letter.
To add on what Amy was saying, so I'm an applicant tracking system subject matter expert, and that means that's the system that recruiters and HR professionals use to scan your resume and manage the application process. So I've worked with dozens and if not hundreds of them, and I've seen thousands upon thousands of resumes. The applicant tracking systems don't scan your cover letter, they scan your resume. And to Amy's point, it's going to look at your resume first, and the recruiter will then determine based off of scoring on the index whether they're going to even see you. So you could have the best cover letter since sliced bread, but if it doesn't if your resume doesn't do a good job, think of the cover letter as your appetizer. But in Europe, they eat the appetizer afterwards, right? They eat the salad afterwards versus here in the States, we eat it in the beginning. So the cover letter is actually going to be used by the recruiter or the HR professional after they've looked at your resume and determined that you're a candidate worthy of additional exploration. Then they'll use that cover letter, to Michelle's point, to determine whether there's you really understand the organization, or to Amy's point, you've taken a cover letter template and slapped on their information. They're also going to use the cover letter to determine how proficient you are at business writing. So make sure that your cover letter is both grammatically well done and spelled correctly. Too often we've seen that, and recruiters will then just exit and say, this person can't write business proper English, they're out of here.
Before we go on, I know I asked like 3 parts, but it's part of the resume and cover letter conversation. Can you guys address if you've been unemployed for a while, how to fill in the gaps and how to speak to that gap? I don't, Amy, I see you nodding, so I don't know if you want to answer it first.
Sure. I think it's hard to hide. And so like many things in life and in job searching, I think, addressing things directly is the best thing to do. And so you need to think about what your story is that you're going to tell about why you left your last job. And I think it has to be an authentic story, because I think a good recruiter will be able to suss out when they're not getting the whole truth. And so think about what it is, right? Why, what happened, workshop it with people who love you, so that you can hear if you're being defensive, or if you're able to sort of talk about it, kind of straightforwardly. I think sometimes people put things either on their resumes or in an accompanying letter that talks about a reason they may have taken a leave of absence to care for an ailing relative or to raise their children. So sometimes, I've heard advice given that if you stayed home with your children, to actually put that on your resume. I think it's a little controversial. You might not always want to do it, but I do think, I think it's something to think about. If you're talking to a recruiter, I would definitely be transparent about what the gap was about. And I think that, it's okay to have a gap. People lose their jobs. There's a lot that happens in the economy. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It doesn't mean that you're bad at your job or that you did something terrible. And so own it to some degree, and be able to talk about it.
Amy, I just want to add, so I am currently not working, and you and I were chatting last night, and you were saying, you really should put what you're doing now with this committee or other committees, and you should talk about that. And it didn't even occur to me that this, in my gap of not working, that this would be something that's very relevant, whether it's under the heading of volunteer or whatever the case may be. I might not be getting paid for it, but it is work experience that it didn't occur to me to put on a resume or speak to.
So what I would say to you, Alana, and is that it's even more than just you talking about it. I think you doing it, right? So you have now put yourself in front of a whole community of people as a leader. You have organized a program that is incredibly well organized. We all know this about you. You're now in our radar. I mean, you're on my radar anyway, because you're a good friend of mine. But, I do think that thinking of ways to be useful to people, to any people, may turn into something that you don't even realize will turn into something. So I think it's more about putting yourself out there, volunteering, connecting with people, and then the opportunities will come.
Yeah, it was great. It didn't even occur to me. So it was really helpful personally, and I hope to the group as well. Grant, we have probably time for maybe one more question.
Well, I think the question is, and maybe we blended it, but did we fully discuss the how often to follow up and all that?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Follow up.
I did what I do best. I interrupted and got distracted with another topic. So
Patients flow. Michelle, it looks like you had something to say on that with regard to the follow-up.
Sure. Yeah. So follow-up, is a tricky thing. It's a bit of an art and a science to it. I would say if you're looking at the sort of funnel of application, interview, post-interview, starting off with the application, that's where things are most ambiguous. So it kind of goes back to the points that were brought up before around finding folks at a company that are, specific to the job that you're looking for, whether it's the person you think is the hiring manager or the recruiter or someone tangential to the job that you're interested in. So if you submit a job application, then by all means go on LinkedIn or any sort of network where you can connect and find the person that might be closely related to that job that you're interested in. Say, I just wanted to reiterate how much I'm interested in this company and this opportunity and how much I think I can contribute to that. So it's less of saying, did you get my application, and more of just calling yourself out. And that goes far. I've seen that work really well. So I think you can follow up from the get-go, just kind of doing that sort of outreach. In terms of following up after a phone screen or after an interview, I think the best advice I would give there is less about the follow-up and more about just making sure that the person you're speaking to, that you're understanding the expectations in terms of their timeline. So people often ask me this, and I would ask this question myself when you're during the interview of, well, what does the process look like? What is your timeline? What do your needs look like? And kind of really understanding both from the perspective of the process of, okay, this is early stage and we're actually just starting to speak to people, maybe they might tell you we need 2 weeks before we can get back to you. And then you say, okay, great. So in 2 weeks time, I hope you don't mind if I follow up with an email. And then it's less of this thing where you feel, can I follow up? Is it appropriate? Because you've set, the expectation has been set with you of, I'll get back to you in 2 weeks. And you say, okay, great, I'll follow up with you then. So I think the best way to do it is just to, when you're in that interview, is kind of manage that up front. And then you can follow up and it's all expected and it's great. If you don't hear back after that follow-up, that was where the expectation was set, I would say give it maybe another few days to a week or so and just say, oh, as per our chat, just wanted to reiterate my interest. And, I know we'd spoken about this specific time frame. I'm looking at a few opportunities and just wanted to make sure that this is my priority. And so just wanted to kind of check in with you and kind of see if timeline has changed or anything's changed on your end. I think that's fully appropriate to do that, especially once you've set the expectation that you're going to be doing that.
Does anyone else have anything to add on follow-up?
I would even add to Michelle's point. I think everything she said definitely on point. In your last, maybe one or two, if you don't hear back, it's okay to follow up probably another 1 or 2 times after that. I would say give it a week in between, especially now with everything going on, right? We don't know what everyone's dealing with at home. In the last correspondence, I would say almost give the person an out as well and say, listen, like if you have moved on to someone else or the role is no longer available, anything that you can share with me or any feedback I would really appreciate, right? And just kind of tap into that human aspect of it. And also knowing that you're looking for feedback. I think that's what everyone's wanting at the end of the day, right? Is just some sort of feedback. So
yeah, that's true.
And to just to add a little bit further on that, going back to, it starts in the beginning, right? It starts even before it starts. And by that, I mean, you've done your homework. You've identified as best you can who the organization is, what they're about, who the people you might be working for. If you're working with a recruiter, and by the way, we advocate you work with recruiters, not because we've been them and we still do it, but I forget who said it, there are amazing recruiters out there and they can become your Jerry Maguire and they can become your advocate. You need to qualify who that individual is because they typically have a relationship with the hiring manager and can determine whether the fit is there. If you're not able to do that, you're going to want to make that internal, that meaningful connection, again, using that phrase, because it's important. You're going to want to make that meaningful connection with the HR person so they can become your advocate or your champion. Once you've made that relationship and you're in the interview process, you're going to want to collect as much information as possible with whomever you meet. So afterwards, you can reach out to them on LinkedIn and you can connect with them there. not from a stalker perspective, but you can say, hey, Charlie Brown, it was so great spending time with you. I wanted to reach out here, regardless of what happens. I thought it would be good for us to have a professional working relationship. And then that sets the stage, and you can have level of professional persistence, but you know what? Timing might not work out. The position might have lost funding. They might have put it on freeze. Who knows what it is? But that's why you need to have multiple irons in the fire.
Yeah, that's really great advice, because what you're doing is putting right out there that I get it, that maybe this opportunity didn't work out, but either, to Michelle's point, I'd love some feedback, or just would love to keep the dialogue open. Maybe a future opportunity could open up. So sadly, we're going to close. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I did ask each panelist to prepare like one parting tidbit, like one line, one piece of advice, one tip that you'd like to leave our group with. Michelle?
Yeah, I would just say back to the skills and the sharpening piece, and that don't underestimate the skills that you've built and the career that you've had and your accomplishments, and make sure that you're finding the right platforms to present that and to knowledge share and to impart the knowledge that you have. And so, yeah, I think during times where you're looking for jobs, you can it's a very vulnerable place to be, but don't forget the incredible skills that you've built and what you have to contribute, and figure out the ways to really promote that.
Great. Amy?
Yeah, I guess I would say, you only need one yes. And so I remember when I was looking for my first job out of college, my sister sent me a book called What Color is Your Parachute? I don't know if any of you remember that book. After I burst into tears and yelled at her on the phone that I was never going to get a job. And there's one page in that book. It's literally an entire page of no. And then there's one yes at the very end of the page. And so, I just would leave you with that image that, you might get a lot of no's, you might get a lot of ghosting. Someone asked about ghosting, don't take it personally. It's probably not about you, and know that yes is at the end and the no's on the way don't really matter so much.
That's great. Sadaf?
I would say definitely the job search process in normal times is an unusual one. We don't have muscle memory for this, right? It's not something that we do on a weekly, monthly basis. So time feels longer than it is. And again, you throw COVID in there. So just try to stay patient, be patient with yourself, with others, be kind to yourself, and just keep at it. Preserve your energy.
That's really sound advice. And then Jason.
Everyone has made some really great suggestions. I think that it's important you remember who you are, the value that you bring to the organization, and we have to determine, does this meet my personal equation? Is this the right fit? And to be rejected from an opportunity, it hurts. It hurts us all, and we've all been there. But the most important thing is finding the right fit. And some people might say, hey, Jason, I need a job today, never mind the right fit. Well, you might have to take a freelance or a contract or a gig situation right now, or you might even take a job that's not the right optimal position right now. But finding the fit, if an organization rejects you, that's okay, because either the timing wasn't right or it wasn't the right fit, and they've just saved you a lot. So turn those lemons into lemonade and find some place that wants you and that needs you. I've been chatting with a number of people here privately, and there is an organization out there for you if you want to be a part of it. You just have to put yourself out there, and you have to play the game in a way that is going to allow you to make those meaningful connections.
That's
and
great.
by the way, I also put in that information in the chat if anyone wants those free networking templates or if they have any questions. Thank you.
That's great. And just to the other panelists, if there's anything you want to share with the group that you mentioned over the course of the evening, please definitely add it to the chat now. I've also reposted the Jewish Business Networking Committee's URL on the Jewish Center website, as well as our email address if you'd like to reach out. All our resources are there, our job postings, anything that we may be able to help you with would live there, as well as a recording of this conversation. I want to thank our panelists for your time, for your thoughtful insight. It was so helpful. It was so interesting. And we really appreciate it. And thank you, Grant, my co-host, and Aaron and Rabbi
Thank you, Alana.
for helping host from the tech perspective this evening. I appreciate everyone's help in making this a successful event. And just one plug, it's membership month at the Jewish Center. So if anyone is interested in this kind of programming, services, other programming, just check out the JC website at jcny.org. So thank you, everyone, and good night. And good luck in your searches.
Night,
Good
everyone.
luck. Happy holiday.
Thank you. Take care.
Happy holidays.